Hello, welcome back. At 88 years old, Frances Swaggart has reached a point in her life where silence no longer feels like an option. After decades of standing firmly by the side of her husband, televangelist Jimmy Swaggart, she has begun to reveal truths that many never imagined she would speak aloud. For millions of people across America and beyond, Jimmy was known as a preacher, a gospel singer, and a man of God whose fiery sermons drew huge audiences and inspired devotion. But Frances, who knew him better than anyone, carried with her secrets that painted a far more complicated picture. Their marriage and ministry had always been held up as a model of Christian faith, yet behind the cameras and the carefully crafted image was a reality filled with betrayal, scandals, and struggles that Frances bore in silence. Now, with Jimmy gone and Frances nearing the final years of her life, she has begun opening up about what really went on behind the scenes of their empire. Her story begins long before the television lights and international fame. Frances Anderson was a strong-willed young woman from Louisiana, deeply rooted in her faith and determined to live a life that honored God. In the early 1950s, she met Jimmy Swaggart, a passionate teenage preacher with a love for gospel music but very little money or stability. Their relationship moved quickly, and in 1952, Frances married Jimmy at just 15 years old while he was 17. At a time when most teenagers were still figuring out their future, Frances committed her entire life to supporting her husband's ministry. She played the organ at services, managed the logistics, and encouraged Jimmy through years of hardship and poverty. The early years of their marriage were not glamorous. They traveled from town to town, often struggling to afford basic necessities. Frances later spoke of moments when they survived on almost nothing, relying on the kindness of others. Jimmy would preach wherever he was allowed, whether in small churches, tents, or even open fields, while Frances carried the heavy responsibility of making sure their lives and ministry didn't fall apart. Those sacrifices eventually paid off. By the late 1960s, Jimmy's gospel albums began selling well, which opened the door for television opportunities. In the 1970s, the Swaggarts transformed from a struggling couple into nationally recognized figures, with their ministry reaching millions of households through broadcasts, music, and large gatherings. As their influence expanded, so did the pressures. Donations flowed in by the millions, and the ministry quickly became a religious empire. Frances, though deeply involved in the background, noticed how the focus began shifting away from faith and toward wealth, power, and influence. Jimmy wanted more airtime, larger audiences, and greater control. Their once humble beginnings were replaced with lavish homes, luxury cars, and a lifestyle that stood in sharp contrast to the sacrifices they once made. Frances kept smiling for the cameras, always playing the role of the supportive wife, but behind closed doors, she was already burdened by rumors and whispers about Jimmy's growing ego and questionable behavior. By the 1980s, Jimmy Swaggart had become one of the most powerful televangelists in the world. His program reached nearly 8 million households, his Bible college was growing, and his church in Baton Rouge became the centerpiece of his empire. But with success came temptation, and soon the cracks in their carefully built image could no longer be hidden. In 1988, Jimmy's reputation came crashing down when he was caught in a prostitution scandal that shocked the Christian world. His tearful confession, declaring "I have sinned," became infamous, but for Frances, the humiliation was far deeper and far more personal. She had spent decades building the ministry with him, presenting a united front as his wife and partner, only to see it shattered in an instant. Even then, Frances chose silence. She sat quietly during his public confession, never revealing the heartbreak, betrayal, or anger she felt inside. Instead, she played the role of the forgiving wife, because to walk away might have meant the collapse of everything they had built together. The ministry employed hundreds and brought in millions. To abandon Jimmy could have destroyed the empire. So Frances stayed, not only out of loyalty but out of obligation to protect the image of their ministry. But the scandals didn't end there. In 1991, Jimmy was caught once again in another prostitution scandal, this time in California. For Frances, it was another devastating blow, reopening wounds she had tried to hide. Many thought this would be the end of their marriage, but Frances once again remained silent, standing by him despite the humiliation. People speculated about why she stayed, some believed it was love, others thought it was financial necessity, while many felt it was her faith that kept her bound to her role as the devoted Christian wife. Whatever the reason, Frances continued to carry the weight of Jimmy's sins, shielding him from even greater fallout and keeping the ministry alive. Insiders would later say that Frances endured far more than the public ever knew. She lived with betrayal, with secrets, and with the heavy burden of maintaining an image that no longer matched reality. She was strong, but her silence came at a cost, robbing her of her own emotional freedom and forcing her to endure heartbreak privately while the world saw only a polished performance. Now, as she nears the end of her life, Frances is finally beginning to reveal the truths she carried for so long. She has admitted to the personal pain, the hypocrisy, and the hidden battles that never made headlines. For decades, she put loyalty above her own well-being, but in speaking out, she has allowed the world to see the darker side of Jimmy Swaggart through the eyes of the woman who knew him best. And in the end, her story is not only about betrayal and scandal but also about the devastating cost of silence, loyalty, and sacrifice.